is the new 2024 Lamborghini Revuelto, and wow, prices start at $600,000. It has over 1,000 horsepower, and it's the latest, newest model in a line of Lamborghini flagship supercars that stretches all the way back to the Miura and the Countach. Today, I'm going to review the new Revuelto and show you all of its quirks and features. Today's video is brought to you by Cars and Bids, my online enthusiast car auction site that recently sold this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Check it out at carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the Revuelto, and there are many quirks and features, but let's start with the basics. This is Lamborghini's all-new, totally redesigned flagship supercar, and it continues a lineage that goes back decades, starting with the Lamborghini Miura in the 1960s, then the Countach, the Diablo, the Murcielago, the Aventador for the last 12 years, and now this, the Revuelto, a very famous long line of cars, and this is the newest version. Now, even though the world is turning electric, the Revuelto is not. Quite. It is a plug-in hybrid with electric motors, but it still has a V12, a 6.5 liter V12 that makes 815 horsepower. Now, when you pair that with the electric motors, this car has 1,001 horsepower, massive. In fact, it's the most powerful Lamborghini ever produced. Like previous Lambo supercars, it has all-wheel drive, and this will do 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds on its way to a top speed of just shy of 220 miles an hour. And just in case you want to be eco-friendly, you can go on fully electric power with no gas engine at all for about 4 miles. It's not much, but it's something. But anyway, on to the quirks and features, and let's start with the key, which actually isn't particularly quirky. You can see it says Lamborghini on one side, on the other, lock, unlock, and the trunk button. A fairly standard key, like you might expect for a fairly standard car. However, that is the only fairly standard thing about this car. Once the doors are unlocked, to open them, you reach under this part of the bodywork here, and there's an electronic handle popper. You push it, the door pops open, and then you lift it up. The doors go up just like they should in a Lamborghini. Now, when you climb inside, you are greeted by, well, a quirk fest, an interior that is very different and unusual compared to what you might find in a lot of other cars, starting with the steering wheel, which has 26 buttons on it and 4 dials. Actually, the interior of this car is fairly restrained in terms of buttons. There's not very many anywhere else except the steering wheel, where you have basically everything. And they're all kind of interesting, actually. We start over on the left, where you have this button that looks like a road. That is your lane keep assist. You can turn it on or off. And believe it or not, this car also has adaptive cruise control. This little stalk to the left of the steering wheel turns on your adaptive cruise. You can adjust your following distance and then have the car help keep you in your lane. A Lamborghini V12 with lane keep assist and adaptive cruise control. This is a brave new world. Now, moving down below that button, you have these arrows. These are actually your turn signals. You don't have a traditional turn signal stalk in this car. For left, you press the left arrow. For right, you press the right arrow. For a quick lane change with 3 blinks, you just tap on the little button or hold it down longer, and then the turn signal will stay on indefinitely until you press the off button in the center. Yes, there is a separate button just for turn signal off. You don't just tap the button a second time. It's kind of interesting. Now, below that, you can see you have your brights. Over on the right, you can turn on your automatic brights, your high beams, and on the left, you can do one single flash if you want to flash your high beams at someone. Now, here on the left side of the steering wheel, you can also see there are a few dials. On the bottom, this dial adjusts the suspension harshness. And there's actually only 2 settings, sort of a harsher one and a less harsh, more comfortable one. But in the center of this dial, there is a button. You press that, and it turns on the axle lifter, which of course lifts up the front end of the car so it can more easily clear like steep driveway angles without scraping. Now on the top here, this dial adjusts your drive mode, and you can choose between a few interesting ones. The standard basic drive mode is called City, and it starts the car in electric mode, and it's just for those 4 miles of pure electric range. You also have Strata and Sport, so that's sort of a regular normal mode and a sporty performance mode, and then you have Corsa in addition, which is race mode, where the car gets its most ferocious and aggressive, all controlled by this red dial on the left side of the wheel. Now in the center of this dial you have a button with a checkered flag on it that activates thrust mode, which is essentially launch control. You can only access it when you're in Corsa drive mode, and then you press and hold this down and you can get into thrust mode for a fast launch. Now over on the other side of the steering wheel, again a group of buttons and dials. At the top you have your voice control, so you press that and then you can tell the car things and theoretically it listens to you. Below that you have your windshield wiper controls. Again, there's no stalks coming off the steering column, so you just use these buttons. And below that, this view button adjusts what's displayed in the gauge cluster screen, which I'll show you a little bit more in a minute as I get into the tech in this car. Now you again have 2 more dials on this side of the steering wheel, just like on the left. The lower dial adjusts your rear wing, your active Aero. The rear wing goes up at a certain speed, but you can adjust that with this dial, and you can set it to minimum rear wing, so you want the car as slippery as possible for high speed runs, maximum rear wing to come up as often as possible, or leave it in automatic and the car will decide. Or you can press the button inside this dial and it activates something called bar mode. What is bar mode? It's exactly what you think. You want to flex outside of the bar, you pull up with your wing up, you press that, and then the wing goes up. And supposedly that's actually why they named it bar mode. If you want to press it again, the wing goes back down, and then you're out of bar mode. But you can press that to manually raise up the wing if you want to pull up outside of the bar and impress everybody, as if a Revuelto is not impressive enough. Now, above that, this dial adjusts your hybrid mode, basically, and you can choose between driving the car in standard hybrid mode, which is normal, or in a special regen mode that specifically tries to funnel more power back to the electric powertrain. Or if you want to drive in full electric, you press the button in the center, you can see it's marked EV, and you get your 4 miles of electric driving. I also love the fact that the E in EV has tiny little horns on the edges. You can see subtle horns recalling Lamborghini's association with bulls. Of course, its logo is a bull. Many famous Lamborghini models have been named after bulls, and so EV mode in this car has little bull horns, just to remind you it may be electric, but it's still a Lamborghini. But anyway, next we get into the center controls here in the center console, the most important of which is the start-stop button, which is under this little red cover. And the cover has a hole in it so you can see the start-stop button, but it's too small to really get a finger in there to press it. You actually have to lift up the cover every time. You want to start the car, press the button, and then it turns on. Now, also in this vicinity, you can see this rather large, like, hoop switch. That's for reverse. You pull that up and the car goes into reverse. And below that, you have 2 buttons labeled P and M for park and manual mode for the transmission. Also in this area, you have this little hole. That is a slot that is perfectly designed to fit the key. So you want to get in the car, you don't have a place to put the key? Well, you do. It has its own dedicated home. You also here have a switch over on the left side to turn on the hazard lights and a switch on the right side to open the fuel door. And you can see these switches are surrounded by hoops, I guess so you don't accidentally bang into them and knock off the switch. These hoops will make sure that the switches stay safe. And you can see that hoop and switch design repeated on the door panel where you have your power window controls. You can see the switches in the center of all of these hoops. Again, I guess so you don't bump into this and knock off one of the switches from the side. Now, also in this vicinity, you can see the power mirror control, which is a very simple traditional unit that I think is pulled straight from Volkswagen and Audi products, since Lamborghini is in the Volkswagen group. Now, it's worth mentioning there are a few things in this car that are pulled straight from from Audi models that don't really look all that special. The mirror control is definitely one of them. Same deal with the stalk for the cruise control that I mentioned before, coming off of the steering column, and definitely the headlight switch over here to the left of the steering wheel. That's borrowed straight from Audi models. But that's about it. Other than that, most of the stuff in this car is bespoke, specific to the Revuelto, like you would expect if you were paying $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 for a car. You want it to be special. This one is. Plus, here's one feature they definitely don't have in Audis, the door popper. This button here on the door handle, you press that and the door automatically pops open, and then of course you push it the rest of the way so you can climb out and create a scene with your upward opening doors. Now, despite the fact that this is the flagship V12 Lamborghini wedge shape, a car known for its impracticality, it's actually surprisingly practical in here. You have a glove box, which isn't always true in these high-performance supercars, and it's decently sized. You also have extra storage space behind the seats, as you can see. Actually, a pretty decent amount of storage back there for some smaller bags, but bags nonetheless. You also have two storage trays here in the center console, one kind of below the center screen and another between the seats, and you have cup holders. They come out of this panel here on the passenger side of the dashboard. The design was borrowed from Porsche, which is, of course, another Volkswagen Group brand. You pop open the cup holders and then, well, you can store your drinks even while you're driving around in your Lamborghini. And this center panel can go back up so you don't have to look at the ugly cup holder inner workings even when the cup holders are out, which I've always thought was a pretty nifty design. Now, since we're talking about the passenger side of this interior, you've probably noticed that the passenger has a screen, their own separate screen, different from the one in the center or in the gauge cluster. The passenger screen, well, actually, it's not really all that cool. You can't do much with it. You can look at the current speed you're going. You can, of course, see what drive mode you're in and some of the basics. You can pull up navigation here, but the coolest part of the passenger screen is undoubtedly this. You have the center screen here with a few display options, as you can see. And if you want to see one of those items, like the G-force meter on the passenger screen, you just put two fingers on it in the center and then slide it to the right towards the passenger screen, and it appears on the passenger screen. You've moved it from one screen to another with a simple slide trick, which is a gimmick, but frankly, a pretty neat one that's cool to see. And since we're talking center screen, let's talk center screen. You can see it is vertically oriented, like a lot of smartphones are, and like the rest of this car, it is surprisingly practical and effective. This center screen is very responsive to your touch. It's reasonably intuitive, although there are some weird menus, but most of the stuff is pretty easy to figure out, and it has some especially practical touches like the camera system. Not only does this car have a backup camera, that's mandated by law, it also has a 3D camera showing all the way around the car, and many other high-quality, high-resolution camera views as well. That's actually pretty useful because these cars often spend time in collections, in tight spaces, tight buildings, garages, being moved around from one location to another. It's nice to be able to see outside the car, particularly when your visibility isn't exactly great, given the low design of the Revuelto. So a full camera system. You also have a navigation system in here, easy to use, intuitive, responsive, and you can connect your phone for Bluetooth, media, all the usual stuff you'd expect from an infotainment system, just from Lamborghini. Now, one drawback of this infotainment system is it does contain all of your climate controls. So if you want to make any simple climate adjustments, you got to press Clima, Italian of course, and then it pulls up your climate controls and you can make adjustments from here. Certainly the most interesting adjustment is you can control the airflow of this giant center air vent that's mounted on the top of the dashboard. You don't have a little dial to control the airflow like in most air vents. Instead, you do it all through the screen, and then the vent responds to whatever command you've put in the screen, which is interesting that that's how they're doing it. Now, next we move on to the last screen in this interior, the gauge cluster screen, which is quite interesting. So, the gauge cluster screen is fairly configurable. The left side is this info panel that you can configure using several buttons hidden on the back of the steering wheel. So the back left side of the steering wheel, you have up, down, left, right, and center center, and those buttons control what's in this left info panel. You can kind of scroll through things, and then the center button is an OK. It's a selector. You can tap on what you want, and that shows what information you want to see on that left part of the screen. Now, the right part of the screen, check this out. You want to see different information over there? Well, once again, you go into the center infotainment system to the information display, and then you tap with 2 fingers and swipe it over to the left, drag it, and there it is showing up in your gauge cluster screen. You just moved it on over, which is, again, really cool. Also a gimmick, but again, kind of a cool one. Now, you can also cycle through the various different displays offered by this right side screen by pressing this little button on the steering wheel, this sort of left-right arrow hexagon, and you can see all of your different options without having to go into the center screen and swipe every single time. Now, this gauge cluster screen also offers further customization beyond that. If you tap the View button here on the steering wheel, it will change the orientation of the gauge screen to prioritize a full screen map. So now you have your navigation map directly in front of you, right in your line of sight on the road, which is pretty cool. And you tap it again to go back to the regular display. Also, if you go into Corsa mode in this car, it will bring up this aggressive, high-performance race car looking display, which is a lot more focused for track use than what you get in your regular standard display. So quite a little bit of configuration in here. And next up, a few other items worth noting since we're in this vicinity. For one, I mentioned the buttons behind the steering wheel on the left side. You also have buttons behind on the right side. You can see, again, up, down, left, right. These adjust your stereo. So up, down adjusts your volume. Left, right will change the track or the radio station. And the central one is, again, sort of an OK and agreement button. Also interesting here, I mentioned earlier the car always starts in electric mode, and that's true. When you press engine start stop, you don't hear anything. The car starts and it's fully electric until you adjust the drive mode dial from city mode, electric, over to a sportier mode, and the V12 turns on. And one thing I love when it happens, this little warning pops up on the screen that says V12 engine starting soon. Like it's telling you, be careful, the V12 is about to start up. That's how it's done. Now, one other item worth pointing out, the paddle shifters. You can see them here. They're fixed in place on the steering column. Carbon fiber. They look cool. They feel good. And it's worth pointing out this car has a dual clutch automatic transmission. That's a big deal because it's replacing the Aventador, which had a single clutch automatic for a long time. That was slower and jerkier. The dual clutch will surely be faster and smoother. I'll find out more when I get behind the wheel of the Revuelto in a few minutes. And next up, we move outside the Revuelto, where there are many more quirks, although my very favorite exterior quirk and overall quirk is the rear lighting, specifically the third brake light, which is positioned up here, this tiny little spot near the roofline. But the cool part about it is that when the third brake light is on, it creates the appearance of a bull's head in the back of the car. You can see it here. The brake light is the bull's horn, and then the engine bay area is the rest of the bull's face and chin, and that is a fantastic quirk and a wonderful Easter egg placed into the Revuelto. Again, Lamborghini's heritage is bulls. It's the logo of the brand. Many of its famous cars named after fighting bulls, and you have that little detail. You gotta be looking for it, but it is fantastic. Now, also in this area, you've probably already seen at this point, the engine. 6.5 liter V12, and it is on display. And I don't mean it's under a glass panel on display. I mean, it's out there physically open to the world. You can see the engine, the massive V12. And like on previous Lamborghini models, you have the firing order printed in small print at the base in the center of the engine, a Lamborghini tradition carried on to the Revuelto, which looks very cool. Now, also back here, a few other interesting items. Probably the most notable in back, the exhaust. Massive center exit exhaust right in the middle, front and center. It's where the license plate probably should be, but Lamborghini said, we're going to deprioritize that crap and instead give you exhaust. And of course, V12 like this, it sounds great. Take a listen. And there's more interesting details back here. A big one is the aerodynamic pass-through. You look at the car on the side and it looks like, well, a Lamborghini, but you might not realize there's actually a hole in the bodywork only visible from behind. This is for aerodynamics and airflow. It increases the downforce on the car, and it's mounted right in front of an air intake that can suck air into the engine that's coming through this channel on the side. Kind of interesting. Also interesting in back, the lighting situation. The rear lights, you can see, have this very distinctive design, sort of a line that forks at the end and almost makes an arrow shape, which certainly looks unusual compared to most car lighting. And that cool lighting quirk is continued up front. You can see the running lights have sort of the same look, a line and then it forks, and it's very distinctive and aggressive and cool looking, although it's worth pointing out that when the turn signal goes on up front, it doesn't do that whole thing. It's just the line part, a little bit more subtle than the full-on front forky running lights. Now, as for the overall front-end look of the car, certainly very interesting, because for the first time with a Lambo supercar, you have radar cruise control sensors up here, as you can see. It almost doesn't work with your mind, seeing a shape like this and then that modern technology, but that's the way things are going. Like I mentioned, this car does have the adaptive cruise control. As for the overall look of the car, the overall side profile and design of the Revuelto, I gotta say, I'm actually not that obsessed with how this car looks, mainly because I don't think it looks that different from the Aventador that came before. And the Aventador had been on sale for a long time, 12 years. We wanted a big change, and instead we got, frankly, kind of more of an evolution, which is a surprise because all of the previous Lamborghini supercars have had a totally different look than the one that came before. The Miura to the Countach was a huge change. Then the Diablo rounded it out, also different. The Murcielago, totally different, and the Aventador, totally different from that. The Revuelto, to me, kind of looks like a modernized, updated Aventador, which is a shame after all this time with that design. But just in case you're having trouble telling apart the Revuelto and the Aventador, you look on the side down here on the rocker panel, Revuelto. And once again, you have little bull horns at the edges to tie this car into its Lamborghini bull lineage, which is a cool little touch if you're looking for it. And finally, we move on to the front trunk of the Revuelto, which is rather interesting. For one thing, it's surprisingly large. You can see it's got decent space in here for bags, for storage, if you want to take your Revuelto on a little road trip. In fact, there's enough space, as you can see, for the charging cable, which has its own giant bag and is mounted in here. And there's some other storage bags in here, as you can see, little zippered ones with Lamborghini logos on them. 2 bags. One contains your tire sealant, so if you have a flat tire, you can hopefully seal it and then drive to your service center. The other contains your tools, so if you need to wrench, work on your Revuelto by the side of the road, you can do that. And it even includes the Lamborghini branded gloves that have been included at these cars for decades, still here in this one in case you want to get your hands dirty, or not, as it were, working on your Revuelto. But the quirkiest and most unusual thing about the front trunk is that this is where you plug it in to charge the electric motor. You can see the charge port is here inside the front trunk, which is just bizarre. I don't think I've ever seen another car that has the charge port in a piece of the body. It's usually on the outside. Now, the drawback to this, of course, would be that when you're charging, you can't really close the front trunk, but a Lamborghini has thought of that. You have a little latch on the trunk latch that you can push in and then twist, and then a second extended trunk latch will deploy, allowing you to latch the trunk even when the charging cable is plugged in. So that way you can latch the trunk and lock the car completely, even though it is plugged in and charging. So Lamborghini created this problem by putting the charge port in the trunk, and then they solved it with an extended trunk latch. Very unusual, very quirky. It wouldn't be Lamborghini if it wasn't. But the most interesting thing about this car will undoubtedly be getting behind the wheel and seeing how the Revuelto drives. I'm one of the first to do this in North America. Let's check it out. All right, driving the Revuelto. This is a huge deal. The hugest deal of it is that I'm in this car shifting and it's fast. The shifts are fast. That may not matter to most people because in every other car the shifts are fast, but the Aventador, I have driven many Aventadors and Aventador-based vehicles, and the shifts were always slow but harsh in kind of a cool way, like it was mechanical and it smashed you back, but they were slow, there's no question. And I can't believe here I am in a V12 flagship Lambo and it's like dual clutch upshifting. Wow, it's hard to even imagine after so long of that Aventador transmission. Driving position in this car is good. There's actually a decent amount of space. I think, you know, like Countach, there's not a lot of space. Diablo, there's not much more space. Mercy was the same deal. They started to realize with Aventador, hey, a lot of our customers are tall, you know, men. We got to get some space for these people, and they've really started to do that. Here, I got a lot of headroom. I'm 6'4". I got a couple inches ahead of me. I got knee room. I got leg room. There's really a lot of space in this car, so that's a pretty good thing. All right, we're getting on the freeway here, and we're gonna get on the freeway. Oh man, this thing is fast. Oh. Oh, 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 oh. Wow, this car is seriously fast. Oh. What? Oh my God, that is, I did not realize that was my speed. Let's make sure we don't have any. The wing is on, I can't see behind me. We're gonna cross our fingers here. Wow, I was a big fan of the Aventador, but by the end, it needed to go away. It was just old and big and it wasn't slow, but the shifts were slow and it felt big. This car totally changes the game. It does not feel big. It feels tossable and little, and it's amazing how quickly it responds to throttle inputs. This is not how a car this size should respond. Oh, wow. I mean, this thing is wildly quick to just change directions and to accelerate. It feels like a Huracan STO kind of, like it feels like a really tight little throw it around, slam on the gas kind of car, even though this is like the big flagship Lambo. I'm like honestly astonished by just how tossable it feels since it's the big one. Man, this car is so quick to move and so tossable. The steering precision isn't quite like it is in the Huracan, but it's not far off, and the speed of acceleration I am astonished by. Aventador was just such an occasion car. You would floor it and it was loud, and but it was kind of slow to shift. It was kind of slow to shift directions and location. This car is not like that at all. This is a very much more precise, quick, easy to move instrument. Yeah, steering, right on center steering position is just a little off what the Huracan is, but it's still absolutely fantastic, and the car has an enormous amount of confidence in the corners because it's so wide, and it just feels really, really, really capable of changing directions very quickly in a way that a big Lambo never has before, I think. Oh, it also sounds fantastic. You know, everybody was worried the end of the Aventador was the end of the big V12. Is Lambo going to screw this up? You know, this car still has a big V12 and it still has a lot of power, and Lambo definitely didn't screw this up. Frankly, I think the electric is really only additive in this car, which is not the case of all EV supercars and sports cars. Like in this car, you still have this sound, you still have the feeling of gear changes, but you benefit from instant throttle response like in an electric car. You benefit from the four-wheel drive system that the electric motors makes happen. And if you want to, you can benefit from 4 miles of fully electric driving, which actually is stupid, but it's not that stupid. I mean, if you want to drive somewhere like in your neighborhood and you don't want your neighbors to complain about the noisy Lambo, you can drive electric and it's fine. I admit you do lose some of the rawness of the Aventador. The sound isn't quite as insane. And when you have a car that handles so tight and steers so tight and precise and is so well put together, you lose a little bit of the, oh my God, am I gonna die factor? And there's no doubt about that. But that's kind of been the truth of every single Lambo since the beginning. They get a little bit more rational as they go, and it comes at the expense of the fun, crazy, insane factor. But the great benefit, of course, is the car is easier to operate, easier to use. In this case, I'm sure it'll be more reliable and just kind of generally better. It's really quite impressive, actually, how much like a special model Huracan this larger car feels. in terms of its just precision and quickness to move. And so that's the new 2024 Lamborghini Revuelto. This car has crazy styling, massive power, an insane price tag, and some crazy quirks, just like a Lamborghini should. And now it's time to give the Revuelto a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 73 out of 100, which places the Revuelto here against rivals ahead of them all. The Revuelto is a really amazing combination of crazy Lamborghini looks, good technology and luxury, and shocking speed and agility despite its overall size. The drawback is a huge price tag even by Lamborghini standards, and I'm curious to see how this car fares on the used market, but this is far more impressive than the Ferrari SF90, and frankly, I think the Revuelto is the best all-around exotic car on the market today, short of something like a multi-million-dollar Ferrari Daytona SP3. Lamborghini has a home run with the Revuelto.